Okay, so this video lesson is about factoring, and one of the biggest questions I have received throughout this unit is when do I use what? Like, how do I know what to use when it comes to factoring? So let's just do a general steps to figuring out what you're going to do. Steps to factor. Hashtag, because factoring is super cool and I'm super young and hip. Just like factoring. So some steps to factor. Your first step to factoring every single time, regardless of what degree it is you gotta factor out a GCF. Factor out a greatest common factor. Out greatest common factor. Or GCF. So you do that every single time. You have to double check that it has a greatest common factor. I don't understand why people still don't do it. I will say it 9,000 more times and people will still forget. You have to factor out a greatest common factor. Here's where it's going to take two different branches. Okay? So one branch is if you have a degree, a quadratic, or a degree 2. Or a degree 2. And this was essentially that Unit 5 stuff that some of you still need a little bit of practice on. Unit 5. Woo! And then another branch is anything bigger than 2. So this could be, we'll just write any degree larger than 2. Because we don't really factor things that have a degree 1 or 0. And this was our Unit 6 stuff. Unit 6. Woo! So let's start with the Unit 5 stuff. So we're going to start with, you got to ask yourself, 1, is it a difference of squares? If it's a difference of squares, you're going to use that formula that you have to memorize. If it's going to be a squared minus b squared, and it turns into a minus b times a plus b. That's just something you have to know. It's something you have to practice. It'll come with time. The next thing you can do to factor a quadratic is factor by grouping. And I can't take credit for this next part. I'm actually going to give shout out to Dresden Kogan because she taught me FML, and I kind of like it because everyone hates factoring, so might as well complain about it. So factoring by grouping is when we use the giant X. It's when we use the giant X. And if we have something in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, Dresden put it at this being f, as in the first term. This is the middle term, and this is the last term. And then you do f times m on top, which initially we called, f times l on top, which initially we called a and c when we did this problem in the first place. I'll write it over here for those. And then you put the middle term on the bottom, which in our original one was b. And I kind of like the acronym FML a little more, just because I think it helps you remember what you have to do when you have to factor. Okay, so let's say it's not a difference of squares, and you can't factor by grouping. What is my last resort for quadratics? And that, my friends, is the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So those are the three different ways you can factor something that's quadratic. There's also a few more ways that we can factor with a degree larger than 2. The first way is the difference or sum of cubes. The difference formula is a cubed minus b cubed is equal to a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. And then the sum of cubes, a cubed plus b cubed, is equal to a plus b times a squared minus ab plus b squared. Now, if it's not a sum or difference of cubes, meaning it's either not cubed or it doesn't have two terms, you can factor by grouping. Grouping. Now again, that's just clumping terms together. You can also do the FML way if you watch the factoring video from Unit 6. So if difference or sum of cubes doesn't work and factoring by grouping doesn't work, your last resort is going to be that rational root theorem. Otherwise known as P over Q. So each of these have their own video. I'm going to do an extra examples video for difference of squares. I'm also going to do one for difference of cubes and for rational root theorem, because those seems to be the one that everyone wanted. Things that I'm just at this point you're going to have to know by practicing. The quadratic formula is just something you're going to have to know. Factoring by grouping or FML, something you should know at this point. I know that some of you kind of fell off the homework wagon when I stopped grading it, so maybe it's a good time to go back and get back on the homework wagon. Otherwise, take a second, pick which factoring video you would like to watch, and start there. Start with the one that you are most confused with. Don't waste your time by watching things that are not confusing. Thanks.